If you're new to my channel, then welcome to From Laura's Perspective. If you've seen me before, then welcome back. As you can probably see, I'm in a very different filming location from where I usually film. That's because I've moved away to college and I'm now going to be filming from my apartment instead of from my mom's house. And speaking of being at college, I want to apologize for the delay since my last video. Ever since being here, I've been really busy with school and with my homework and with work, so I haven't really had much time to work on videos, let alone make them. They will still be coming up, just not as frequently, so just be on the lookout. And today, I'm actually going to read for you a paper that I wrote for one of my classes. It's Topics in Fiction, and we were reading Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and it's a pretty interesting topic that I think you'll like, but I just want to give a trigger warning that it discusses sexual assault and harassment, which may be distressing for anyone who's been through those things. But with that out of the way, let's get started.
At the end of Phase the First of Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Alec d'Urberville finds the titular peasant girl, Tess Durbeyfield, sleeping in the woods just before dawn and uses the opportunity to rape her, impregnating her in the process. In 2017, 126 years after Tess of the D'Urbervilles was written and published, numerous girls and women who'd endured a fate similar to Tess's took to social media and put MeToo statuses on their pages, having copied the original statement from actress Alyssa Milano's blog. If all the women who have been sexually assaulted or harassed wrote Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of magnitude of the problem. According to Jones and Wade, these women bore witness to the ubiquitous nature of sexual harassment and sexual assault and made it almost impossible for anyone to look the other way. Even though Tess Durbeyfield is a fictional character from 1891 England, she is one of the women who, at any point in time, could claim Me Too. Not only is Tess raped by Alec, who is essentially her employer, but he makes many advances towards her that could be seen as sexual harassment. And Me Too was about women who had been sexually violated, whether it would be considered assault or harassment. From what studies have found since Tess of the D'Urbervilles was initially written and published, nearly all, that is 97%, of victims of sexual violence are females. Moreover, 63% of these victims are between the ages of 12 and 24. As a 16-year-old girl, Tess Durbeyfield was a perfect candidate to be victimized by someone like Alec d'Urberville. Apart from her demographic risk factors, Tess, when the story first begins, is a mere vessel of emotion untinctured by experience. In other words, Tess is innocent and naive, even for a teenage country girl. Research has shown that young girls who are naive and inexperienced when it comes to sex and other adult matters may misinterpret a male's flirtatious behavior or fail to recognize cues that he will become sexually aggressive, according to the Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine. Therefore, Alec was able to lure Tess into having sexual contact with him via Tess's gender, age, and nature. The Durbeyfield family horse, Prince, who provides the family's income and transportation, dies in a carriage crash crash after Tess and her brother Abraham fall asleep while driving it to deliver beehives. Therefore, Tess blames herself for Prince's death and the predicament it puts her family in. So when Tess's mother, Joan Durbeyfield, pressures her to claim kin with the family's wealthy supposed relative, Mrs. D'Urberville, Tess's naivete and pushover tendencies lead Tess to follow her mother's orders because she sees it as a way to redeem herself for what she feels to be her role in Prince's death. After claiming kin, Tess accepts a job tending fowls at the D'Urberville estate to supplement her family's lost income. The first interaction between Tess Durbeyfield and Alec D'Urberville is while Alec is taking Tess by carriage to the D'Urberville estate in the village of Trantridge. Suffering from PTSD as a result of the accident that killed Prince, Tess began to get uneasy at a certain recklessness in her conductor's driving, according to page 53 of the novel. Tess repeatedly, graciously requests that Alec drive the carriage more carefully. Alec then orders Tess to let me put one little kiss on those Holmberry lips. And if Tess agrees to this, he promises that I'll stop on my honor. Shocked by Alec's ultimatum and obviously not wanting to kiss him, Tess cries, "I thought you would be kind to me and protect me as my kinsman," on page 56. Alec dismisses this comment and orders Tess to stay still so he can kiss her, which she finally gives into, knowing it's the only way she will have a safe trip to Trantridge. Alec is furious to see Tess wipe the spot where he kissed her with a handkerchief, since in doing this, quote unquote, she had in fact undone the kiss as far as such a thing was physically possible. With this, Tess exits the carriage and continues her journey to Trantridge on foot. The way Alec extorts a kiss from Tess is a very clear example of what is known today as quid pro quo. The way Alec extorts a kiss from Tess is a very clear example of what is known today as quid pro quo harassment. From the Latin phrase for this for that, this form of sexual harassment is a form in which sexual compliance is tied to some consequent behavior of the harassing party. This form of sexual harassment often takes place in workplace environments and is targeted towards female employees by male employers or coworkers. Alec doesn't threaten to dismiss Tess from the job she's just been offered for refusing to let him kiss her, as is the most common form quid pro quo takes. Rather, Alec is refusing to deny Tess's request to drive more safely if she doesn't submit to his advances. Therefore, Alec's behavior towards Tess on their way to Trantridge qualifies as quid pro quo harassment. This incident in Chapter 8 is one of the very first red flags foreshadowing the rapist Alec turns out to be by the end of Phase the First of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Despite her tendency to assume the best in others, as I've previously mentioned, Tess does realize that Alec is victimizing her, doing something to her that she does not deserve and is not okay. After Alec poses the ultimatum and Tess initially agrees, she cries, "I thought you would be kind to me and protect me as your kinsman." This means that even if Tess doesn't see Alec's action as harassment, she realizes that she does not deserve anything even remotely similar to sexual harassment or violence, that this is not how her lover or protector ought to behave. Moreover, after Alec gripes about Tess's refusal to allow him to kiss her a second time, she cries out, "I don't like you at all. I hate you and detest you. I'll go back to my mother. I will." On page 57. After Alec promises, "I'll never do it again against your will," Tess does not get back into the carriage with Alec, but changes her mind about going home to her family. Albeit, this is because of her inability to reconcile her rocky start with Alec with concerns regarding how could she face her parents, get back to her box, and disconcert the whole scheme for the rehabilitation of her family on such sentimental grounds. In other words, Tess feels that if she leaves her new position at the D'Urberville estate, she will let her family down. The pivotal moment that qualifies Tess as a Me Too takes place in chapter 11 of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. At that point in the novel, Tess has been working at the D'Urberville estate for quite a while. But as Alec carries Tess away on his horse, she declares that she doesn't love him and that "I am angry with you sometimes" on page 69. In spite of the character traits demonstrated before Tess claimed kin, Tess had sensed Alec's perverted nature to some degree. After the two get lost in the fog, Alec abandons Tess to search for a landmark. When Alec returns, he finds Tess asleep, and Alec uses the opportunity to have sexual contact with Tess, marking her with an immeasurable social chasm on page 74, which was to divide our heroine's personality thereafter from that previous self of hers who had stepped from her mother's door to try her fortune at Trantridge Poultry Farm. What's implied here is that Alec sexually assaulted Tess in her sleep, the very act whose victims came forward on social media with the Me Too hashtag in late 2017. While the Me Too movement sought to break silence on all cases and scenarios of sexual assault and harassment, it was particularly interested in such cases that took place in the victim's workplace. As recently as the 1970s, when women entered previously male-dominated workspaces, according to Jones and Wade, men frequently conditioned women's employment on compliance with male sexual advances, which, as I've previously mentioned, is known today as quid pro quo harassment. Not only that, but work environments at the time were polluted with pornographic material, demeaning language, and other gender-based insults and ridicule, another form of workplace harassment known as hostile environment. As the son of Mrs. D'Urberville, who was providing Tess with the job of tending fowls, Alec essentially acts in the role of Tess's associate or assistant employer. Therefore, Alec is guilty of workplace harassment and sexual assault of Tess, both in ways that would be described today as quid pro quo and in ways that would make for a hostile environment. Although her story takes place 126 years before the movement, Tess Durbeyfield is one of the many women all around the world who could claim Me Too. Thank you all so much for watching. I do plan to make another video expanding on many of the points I made in this one, but I just didn't have time to put them in my paper because it was due so soon and had to be a certain length. But any of your feedback is very welcome, and I apologize again for the delay in this video. Expect to see more soon, but do be understanding that I'm in college now and have a lot going on and I'm really busy, but I will try to keep you updated as much as I can. So please and thank you, and I'll see you next time.